purpose of this evening is to discuss this object, which has just come out, and what this object means, what it does, how it works, why it was done. And what I think you'll discover is the way in which this particular document doesn't fit into the standard sort of stereotype of the dance between books and buildings in our field, and as such is part of an extended experiment, and an experiment in this case guided by AMO and an extended series of partners throughout the Middle East. So basically the way the evening will work is I will shut up, Todd will explain to you what's going on in these 536 pages. So it's a very heavy document. Just to say the obvious to you very quickly, of course, books generally take longer than buildings to make, and they're almost always heavier, and this is no exception. So we're going to move very fast and hard tonight, but almost the purpose here is to give you, as it were, a kind of a report on what this kind of work is about and why this kind of work is operating the way it might go, and in particular maybe to think about the kind of feedback loops that might emerge out of this kind of work and the ways in which perhaps new species of architect or other kinds of species might emerge, as it were, in the shadow of this kind of work. So firstly, Todd will explain the thinking behind this document and how it works, and Rem Koolhaas will also explain it from his perspective. Then we'll spend about half an hour discussing it, which would be largely between ourselves, and then there will be an appallingly short period in which we will simulate democracy, and you will ask questions which will be answered scathingly, but also with a certain degree of tenderness, because we understand that this is going to be always too short, and we would take your frustration at the end as a great compliment. I think that the Almanac is a shockingly good document, and the reason I think it's shockingly good is that it very, very quickly defeats a whole series of standard assumptions you might have about what constitutes research in this field. So it's incredibly, it's a great honor, I think, to listen to Todd and Rem explain the thinking behind this document, which is not produced in the way you might imagine, and I think its effects are not necessarily what the people who did contribute to it might imagine either. So let's begin the discussion with Todd. Todd.
Hi, good evening. Is this working? Nope. Now it is, no? To start with, I guess first it's to be understood that Almanach is not a book, it's actually a project. It's a project we started in 2007 with a number of parties involved, one being OMA, AMO, another being a group called Pink Tank, which is a think tank operating in Dubai, and the third is Volume Magazine, which is in itself another group of people, including Volume Magazine, AMO, and of course Columbia University. We were interested in kind of pursuing further development of our ongoing research of the region in 2007, and we were thinking of doing something like an almanac. I mean, we discovered actually that the word almanac presumably comes from the Arabic word almanach, meaning climate. It can also mean atmosphere or the feeling of a place. And so we quickly found, let's say, the name of our project. Almanach 2 Gulf Continued is the name of the book. It was published this past May. And it's a follow-up to, as I said, the book we did in 2007. And if 2007's book was a look at the region from the outside, looking in and digging into what actually is there, Almanach 2 is very much the opposite, and finding a way to work with people who are living and working there and to project that outward. We also have a website, which we developed during as a way of developing the book. And it's also something that we continue to use as a way to continue discussions about the book. We've also branched out into working with the Huffington Post, where we maintain a blog that looks at, continues to find a new, let's say, readership. We find that every week more people read us every week here than have bought the book, which has been a really generous way of reaching a public, especially in North America. We also come at a time when suddenly there are lots of books about the region, specifically about Dubai, ranging from things that try to show a kind of city of cataclysm to the weirdest city, and also ones that even kind of start to suggest kind of doom. Interestingly enough, a book that came out by an American journalist this past year takes on a strikingly different image. One in the UK, which is a country that is much more familiar with Dubai than, let's say, the US. And in the US, Dubai is then still sold as this kind of exotic place, the city of gold, as opposed to, on your left, the city of gray. We've also been noticing that there was a kind of era that seems to have passed, something that has earned the name Dubai bashing, which was happening a lot in the British press about Dubai. That suddenly Dubai as a city became a kind of an object in and of itself, with ignoring its kind of allowance of layers of complexity, but suddenly became a kind of easily misconstrued or hated monster. And these are just a few of them, ranging from obvious fictions to the revelational, and then even to the kind of prophecy at the epic proportion. Sand will drift down around their trunkless legs, and animals will inhabit their basements. And as the Almanach Project, we simply cataloged all of these kind of very quick to judge moments that had actually very little factual basis to them. And they even continue on to today. This is just a few days ago in the London Telegraph, where it's suggesting that there's going to be this kind of cataclysmic event in the very near future of buildings coming down, which was simply taken from a consultant's mild suggestion in a report unsolicited by the city. So just to kind of give us a very simple idea of where we're talking in the world. And Dubai is often referred to as a city that represents this region, namely known as Arabia. And it's rarely referred to as a global city. And sometimes it's explicitly referred to as not a global city. But this seems to me a kind of ridiculous notion, to think of Dubai without its global connections. I think to start with, Dubai has been built by knowledge primarily from the outside, however limited or advanced. Sometimes this information or this knowledge has come from Great Britain, sometimes from the US, Australia, Japan, Austria, namely North America and Europe. It has been also a place of investment, and more particularly labor source from South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and has been financially pushed and supported by just about every country with a majority Islamic population. And this is a way of saying that for Dubai to fail, it would be more people outside of Dubai that would suffer. In other words, Dubai represents a unique point in the world where the powers that rarely align move from miscommunication to communication. The goals or results of this process are by no means utopian. They are banal and they are unidealistic, but they are ones that show a truly global population that we haven't seen for over 500 years. And for this reason, we should be students of this region and respectful observers. But it's very important to understand that Dubai is also working within a regional network, namely a group of cities on the peninsula, namely Kuwait, Manama, Doha, Abu Dhabi, and then 3 cities of Saudi Arabia we've chosen here, namely Dammam, Riyadh, and Jeddah. And it's a kind of a strange relationship. By no means is it, can you see it as a kind of collaborative effort among the cities. There's extreme amounts of duplication. But duplication is also a kind of bizarre way of acknowledging that something is right. And I think this is something that Manakh too tries to do. It tries to show out, to point out what distinguishes these cities, but by trying to distinguish them, you immediately see that they are actually working for very similar goals. I would say that Manakh too is one of the first efforts to kind of start to see this emerging constellation of cities and what they will mean in the future. When we first started this book, there were the first evidence of crisis, and they immediately put our project into crisis. We were rather optimistic, perhaps foolishly, at the idea of projecting this region as someplace where we knew it was going, and we simply found ourselves not having any clue where it was going. Suddenly, projects were coming to a standstill. Buildings became ruins before they were even finished. At the same time, I feel like it's my watch. It's only a swatch, so. At the same time of the crisis, it was also, ironically, a time when sudden amounts of housing and buildings were coming online and being inhabited. Dubai, as a digital rendering, was becoming lived in. And suddenly the weird moments, the kind of dissatisfactions about a reality were also becoming something we could measure. This is a famous, one of the biggest developers and some of the most kind of disappointed residents, I should say, of the new Dubai. And strangely enough, at the same time that crisis was abounding, suddenly neighborhoods that were once some of the most lively, most fully serviced by infrastructure were being demolished for new development. A really kind of tragic moment, and these sites are now completely vacant within the heart of the city. But I think one thing we also should to note about Dubai is that there was an economy that quickly started to have to face a reality. At the same time, there was another economy, another world of Dubai that continued, as if it never really mattered what had happened on the other edge of the city. This is the old Dubai, as they say. This is the Dubai that was always a global Dubai, connected to Asia, connected to Africa, and the rest of the Middle East. This part of Dubai continues to thrive. Mark made a joke about the length of days, length of time that it takes to make a book. This is how many days it took to make this book. I think it's pretty fast, considering on the first day we had no idea what the book was going to be about. And with the point of crisis, we also started to take on a very serious effort to record the news and to try to map out, let's say, trends of what was happening. Try to find the people who had something to say about what was going on. It was a chaotic moment, not only for the world, but for Dubai, where media is always a kind of, and not just Dubai, but also the region, a kind of unpredictable source of information. This is one of the reviews that we had of Manakh too, and I don't know if it's meant in a good way or a bad way, but we were told that we dropped the gamer graphics and we went for the aesthetic of an international urban conference, and that the book is as dry as a desert road linking Dubai to Abu Dhabi. pretty dry road. In essence, though, I think it wasn't an intentional point of our effort for the book. We didn't necessarily aim for a black and white book, but in the end, I think it was a way of reacting to, let's say, an image-laden way of understanding the region, and suddenly being able to find people who could project a story with words. We went out, we met people in Riyadh, in Jeddah, in Dubai, in Doha, and really started to kind of iron out kind of what the issues were. It was a tiresome process, but also incredibly informative. It led to a hugely immense amount of people who contributed to this book. Over 140 people contributed in some way to this book, which for us was an entirely different way of working. We went from doing most of the work for the first almanac, mostly in the AMO office, to suddenly having to build up a network of people, not only from the region, but also reporting from other places, from North America, from Asia, Europe, and Africa, about the region. I just wanted to quickly touch upon three significant things about the book. One is that we introduced Saudi Arabia, which was a huge effort on our part to kind of take it on. In an amazing way, we found so many people who were willing to trust us and to work with us to make this story right. But it was a very difficult process because there is so much. Saudi Arabia is pursuing the development of 6 economic cities built for millions of people. These are kinds of new cities that the Gulf has never seen before, except in Saudi Arabia. We were also starting to kind of find moments of total normality in Saudi Arabia. This being a public park, which kind of suddenly starts to, just this single image we found, started to transform kind of our image of what daily life is in Riyadh. We also started to find institutions that are being developed in Saudi Arabia. This is the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. Suddenly a huge effort. I can't get into today, but potentially transforming the notion of how we see universities. Again, to get this part of every day, we found a female photographer, a woman photographer who's a psychotherapist, one of the few psychotherapists in Saudi Arabia. She was the first person ever to photograph the interiors of the only train in Arabia, which connects Riyadh to the Gulf Coast. It's the only place, public space, where it's so easy to for men and women to interact. And suddenly trains be kind of, looking at spaces like a train become ways of understanding not only how people live, but also that there is a normal place. And instead of looking for ways of providing criticism about cities in Saudi, we look for people who are actually there, who are providing criticism not only toward the outside, but within the city. And this is a man in Jeddah, Ahmed Shugari, who has a popular TV show, and he's continuously kind of pressing social norms through his very brief and comedic TV shows. One of the other issues that we took on in the book was, again, with a topic that we addressed in Almanac 1, which is something that is often kind of the story that we hear most. That being, of course, the condition of laborers. Interestingly enough, this was in the news just this week about the Guggenheim promising in Abu Dhabi that they will commit to protecting the rights of migrant workers, as if it's so clear what the rights of migrant workers are in such a kind of complex international system. to even suggest that there is a way to measure that is ridiculous, while at the same time having to commend what they're suggesting here. In Almanach 1, we looked at where these men lived, and we were actually found that what's often called hidden Dubai is very much an exposed Dubai, a place where anyone can go and visit. These are simply other kinds of neighborhoods in the city. With Almanach 2, we also decided, okay, let's really look at this relationship of the Gulf with these other countries where these unskilled laborers are coming from, namely, of course, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Sri Lanka. And we started to look at ways of measuring this money, and we quickly found there's no way to measure this money. These are all just very rough estimates. So we decided to take one region of India, Kerala, which is painted in red on the map here. Kerala is obviously a small fraction of India. 2/3 of Dubai comes from India. 2/3 of that population comes from Kerala. That means like roughly 1 in 6 people you come across in the UAE is from this little part of India. So we went. We went with an architect who grew up in Dubai but is from Kerala, and we took a trip along this coastline, which is the only highway of Kerala, and is often noted as the highway that's developed because of the Gulf. Almost every street has a money transfer station where the money transfers from men working in the region is this is where families pick it up. These places are just constantly busy. A common presence in any kind of public building is Gandhi with the founding father of the UAE. This is a totally normal condition. Dubai takes on a kind of mystique, a kind of representation of success and of luxury. The name is everywhere. It's represented with a kind of obsession not only with materialistic gain, but also a kind of movement away. And this is just one example from the book where we went to this town called Payangadi, which is probably a few hundred people. It's a one-road town. And we walked down with a guy who lives here, and he pointed at each of these houses. Every single house had a relationship with the Gulf. A father working in Saudi Arabia, kids working in Doha, daughter married to a man working in Dubai. So every single house was built with Gulf money. Houses like this are a dime a dozen in Kerala. This is the home of a doctor who educated in Kerala, found his way into a successful career in Dubai. They have a name, they're called Gulf houses, and they range anywhere between these two kinds of houses. And we've shown quite a few of them in the book. So I think what we wanted to show with this kind of trip to Kerala is, while of course there are a lot of inequalities, a lot of terrible stories of what can happen, it's a much more complex story. And interestingly enough, from the West you'll hear about the problems of poverty and the problems of inequality that drive the system. If you talk to people in India, the complaint is this connection to the Gulf is a kind of increase in materialism, a kind of addiction to an easy cash. Obviously there's a problem, but what that problem is it seems to have two different currents. The third topic that I just wanted to bring up is the notion of a united Gulf, one that is completely at this point, naive thing to suggest, but there is a GCC rail proposed. And a writer, Tabitha Decker, looked at the GCC rail, which will be connecting the different Gulf cities. We also started to see that this will potentially set up a linking not only among these cities, but into North Africa and the Middle East. And it starts to suggest a kind of return to something that hasn't been talked about for several decades, and that is the notion of infrastructure. Infrastructure, of course, Dubai was a big story for infrastructure this past year with the opening of the metro, a story that had its own kind of stories of trials and mistakes and warnings that it would never work, that all these different kinds of people would never sit in the same kind of train, that rich and poor could never sit together, that man, woman could never sit together. However, it quickly just becomes part of what Dubai is. And it's suddenly become a place that, the metro has suddenly become a place that has kind of adapted to Dubai, but also Dubai has adapted to it. And it becomes a kind of a public space for Dubai that it actually has never had. And it starts to remind me of kind of the initial notions of infrastructure that were being developed in the region. This is a picture from the early 60s. This is the development of British engineers of a camel trough in the desert of Saudi Arabia, a kind of bizarre piece of infrastructure that would eventually have to find that people using it would have to find its use, to start to adjust to what it means to use this new piece of infrastructure. And it starts, to me, it also reminds me of, this is a picture of Dubai in early 1960s. One of the first roundabouts and one of the first pieces of asphalt laid in the Gulf. It starts to suggest that infrastructure, while it's concrete and steel, often kind of lays the ground for other things to happen, namely social and cultural. And while as the GCC railway starts to develop, this is something that will connect to it. Some new rail stations being developed in Saudi Arabia. And if you look at any sort of renderings being developed for the Gulf, this is, you couldn't be any more generic in how they're represented, as if everyone has to have the Damascus souk roof, and gold is always a color. So it's a very generic rendering, but it also starts to suggest that perhaps architecture is not what's going to do it, but the kind of the planning and the laying of infrastructure as a way to start suggesting how these cities will begin to evolve. And I just wanted to end with one of my favorite pictures from the book, which kind of shows you the unique quality, but also the kind of banal or normality of life. This is Abu Dhabi, one of the most diverse crowds of people I've seen for one of the most banal events, a motorboat race. Thank you.
Essentially, I want to compliment Todd and explain to you why our office, or why I myself remain very obstinate in maintaining our engagement with the Gulf. It is not strictly altruistic, but there are elements of idealism involved in this constant preoccupation. But I want to really show the context of our involvement, the way I see it, and therefore the extent to which this is a kind of really serious effort with political overtones. After 9/11, it seemed that, in a way, America would separate itself from the rest of the world, and that therefore Russia, China, India, the Arab world, and Europe were not only condemned to each other, but were on the brink of engaging in new kind of partnerships and perhaps a new intimacy. But of course, the difficulty is that we are all enjoying very different political systems. And what became clear since 2001 is, of course, that where in '89, with the fall of the wall, the West was simply assuming that in the imminent future the entire world would turn light blue, that as time goes along, and that would be the end of history, but as time goes along, we see more and more that actually what is blue now may stay blue, but that what is red and yellow is not likely to become blue in the immediate future. And so that is a kind of very harsh new kind of reality that needs to be engaged, and which, in my view, made it even more compelling and urgent that all these opposite political systems remain engaged with each other and communicate. This is a kind of something where, in the context of the European Union, I have been very, very adamant, but completely unsuccessful. But part of my persona in the past 5 years has been to be involved in the kind of policy making of Europe. I was part of a particular group that needed to define where Europe was going, and in that my role was an advocate for this continued involvement. And that advocacy takes form of many forms. It is about communication in and with China, kind of partly through buildings, but also partly through performance. It is about communication in and with Russia. In this case, it is an educational initiative that we are introducing in Moscow, where we will start a 3-year-long experiment with a research-based architectural education that commits itself to finding out and defining a number of crucial issues, not only in Russia, but also in the world. What is the status of preservation? What happens in design, energy, and public space? It speaks for itself, but all of this is kind of simply part of a continuing involvement with these worlds, and in that the Arab world is no exception, and in fact perhaps the one where I've invested my most personal feelings. Now, as I already mentioned, this advocacy, particularly in Europe, is completely unsuccessful, and on the contrary, we may be facing a kind of situation through the crisis where the Atlantic world separates itself from the rest of the world, kind of simply by its and through its kind of relentless anti-Islamic rhetoric. Recently, one of the most notorious Dutch politicians spoke on Times Square. These were his words. One of the chairmen of the German bank had to resign because he was quoting words of a kind of similar nature. The combined wisdom and rhetoric of the European leaders is kind of simply too appalling for words, kind of really revolting. So we are facing a kind of incredible moment of extreme political mediocrity, to put it positively, and negativity, to put it badly, where simply Europe is kind of turning its back to commitments that were made much more early, and where in a nearly racist polemic, a country like Switzerland forbids minarets, and where this is kind of maybe speaks for itself, a computer game in Austria where the point is to kill as many mullahs as possible. What is kind of really staggering is that kind of simply because we are talking here about Islam, that this is considered more or less done, and not as offensive as it would be if other groups or populations were aimed at. The same thing is, of course, unfortunately true in America. And what has kind of shocked me is that even highbrow media, such as the New York Review of Books, that recently published a review of some of the Dubai books that Todd was kind of really showing by a Newsweek journalist Joshua Hammer, is taking part of it. And for me, there were two sentences that were really deeply revealing. In one of them, a taxi driver is from Pakistan is quoted as, "The situation is very bad here." Well, I find it really, really deeply shocking that an intellectual magazine quotes a taxi driver, you know, which is the old trick of kind of spreading malicious lies that journalists have used. And that another amazing kind of statement as an indictment against Dubai was that kind of Americans stick with Americans, Brits with Brits, Indians with Indians, everyone keeps to his own kind, as if the situation is different anywhere else in the world. And actually, Todd was also showing that in trains, metros, and sports events, there is actually a mix that is more profound, if I may, if you look at an audience here, than there than it is here. So this, in a way, insistence on communication is what is driving our commitment to still maintaining the interest in the Gulf, even though seemingly it is over. In the first wave, we introduced in the Biennale in Venice the daring theory that the rulers of the Gulf knew what they were doing and that they were deeply personally involved in the entire effort. Now we are documenting that actually, you know, with all the mosque and minaret trouble in America and Europe, that there is many churches in the Arab world, that bishops speak there, that there are religious people, and to the extent that Dubai is perhaps a strange city, I don't think that its strangeness is unique to Dubai, but I believe that what we are seeing there almost as a kind of laboratory is the strange, and maybe we see it there earlier, is a strangeness which more and more of our cities will show and accommodate. One of the things that kind of haunts me kind of recently is the sensation that many new cities are not really permanently inhabited, and that perhaps in the future the kind of nomadic status of so many of citizens will cause a situation where no city will be inhabited with a kind of density that we remember from kind of earlier iterations of city. And in Dubai, if you want to kind of show for signs of inhabitation, you are kind of really hard pressed. So in the end, we decided to call inhabitation irregularity, and we're tracing points of irregularity, kind of tiny shift of an object on a balcony or a window or a curtain. So, but I think that this evacuation of the city and the simultaneous evacuation of the countryside will be one of the big themes of the next kind of decades, and Dubai is only an early example. Now, in the context of this commitment, we are committing ourselves to working as much as possible in this region on projects that are able to really capture the most, not so much extreme, but the most unique aspects of it. We started briefly in the initial kind of wave of euphoria. Dubai enabled us to kind of really address the issue of architecture's current addiction to shape and therefore its imminent irrelevance by kind of suggesting on this spot a building that would kind of break really radically and brutally with that tradition. The so-called Renaissance, a huge slab of white concrete, 200 by 300 meters. It would also rotate. That without Dubai and without the crisis that was visible and tangible in Dubai, we would never have been able to imagine it. And also it was for us a wake-up call, I would say, in terms of our own work and future direction. We are trying, it's not happening in Dubai, but kind of perhaps it will happen in Riyadh, and that we are kind of experimenting. This was the original facade, maybe it will change slightly or radically. Another kind of project that enabled us to find a kind of vernacular scale. And what Dubai also enabled us to kind of think about was that if a city is so profoundly unserious and if it is so marginally determined by planning in the classical sense of the word, what are then the kind of devices and what are then the mechanisms that could somehow define its future? And so we looked at NASA and kind of proposed kind of a real-time planning and urbanism, where given the fact that no plans could be implemented and that even if implemented, chaos was a certainty, that planning could become a kind of process of permanent improvisation and to make somehow the aberrations work. So that, again, was part of Dubai's richness. Dubai was the only environment, and is still the only environment, where we can do mass housing. We were asked to do mass housing, cheap housing. No one in 20 years would even dream to ask us to do a thing like that. In Dubai, it's happening. Dubai also enabled us to experiment with preservation for the first time, maybe not in the classical sense of the word, not necessarily preserving masterpieces or beauty, but preserving a dignified, Todd was already talking about it, and beautiful form of very intricate, almost village-like life at the foot of these skyscrapers, where this contrast we wanted to maintain, and so where we looked at empty and bold patches in that pattern, would maybe kind of develop them or even extremely develop them, or find a kind of crop rotation where you could make sure that bands of the old stuff would exist and coexist with new stuff. But anyway, it is a city where this kind of experimentation is perhaps possible and useful. I want to show maybe two other efforts that are maybe more typical of the current moment in the Arab world, where this drive for development is abating, and where therefore other issues and issues of how to keep what is there and how to think about preserving not only cities but actually the physical conditions of the city. And I want to talk about Libya. That's how far we go. In this map, everything which is yellow is connected to civilization, and everything which is red is disconnected. So this is Libya here. So a considerable part of it is disconnected from it, is desert. But even in the desert, of course, there are paths. In Libya, we are developing, first of all, observing. Todd has made a long journey through the entire desert, kind of documenting all the parts, but also all the phenomena there and all the fragilities that are being exposed to tourism and to invasion of foreigners. This is a kind of German methodology, a kind of autarkic truck that brings all the beer and wurst that is necessary for an autonomous existence in the desert, but that then wreaks havoc with the kind of beauty of places like this and does damage, even if superficially it's not really damage, but damage that will take literally centuries to undo. Similarly, there are kind of rocks and caves and caves art in these caves, among the oldest that mankind knows, but it's unprotected and therefore very fragile. So what we're kind of working on is 3 national parks. This is a proposal, and write scenarios in those kind of proposals, how these parks should be treated, where there is access and where there would be no access, the kind of lightness and sensitivity of using any of these parks, and a particular effort that in order to unlock them, we only use already existing infrastructure so that we are not contributing to further degradation. And these are our proposals that range from doing nothing to a desert station and to really nodes of a degree of tourism. So it's, as we formulated it, it's not tourism, but the tourist is turned into a traveler. And these are then kind of responsible tools to offer a traveler in return for kind of sensitivity to the landscape. I've done something which I thought would be impossible, to become part of a scientific committee to help to preserve the inheritance of Hassan Fatih, the Egyptian architect. His sustainable village is in dire trouble and needs to be kind of rescued. And finally, and this is kind of rush, we are working in Syria. These are archaeological sites in Syria, so a country of literally unimaginable richness. These are all the Roman sites. And this is Syria with a kind of belt, an arc of green, and then a heartland of desert. In that heartland, there is this Palmyra, an unbelievably kind of beautiful city, ruin, which is particularly beautiful because it is again completely non-touristic. There are no facilities. It's simply there in the desert, and somehow our commission is to think of how that beauty could be maintained as long as possible. A further kind of thing that we are kind of trying to do there is to find ways in which the typical difference that you see here, and which is one of those kind of poisonous by-effects of preservation, is that it kind of radically changes the nature of what you wanted to preserve. This is a used space in Damascus, and this is a preserved space in Damascus. And of course our heart is always here, but as architects the moment we touch it or think about it or even look at it, it has a tendency to turn into this condition. So we are looking for ways of out of that dilemma, and we think we have found perhaps one of these places where kind of rather than do something exceptional, another kind of icon, another kind of redundant building, we found an abandoned structure that is there from dating from the 80s in the center of the city, kind of really, and in itself quite beautiful, that nobody knows what to do with. So we've basically asked whether we could take over this ruin and maybe and simply make our statement by slightly converting it and making that a contribution to the city. So this is kind of simply a breakneck place to journey to kind of simply explain in which political context we think this is an important engagement, and also to show how architecturally the effects of that engagement are one of a constant extension of our repertoire, simply by confronting us with situations that we could never imagine before. Thank you very much.
So in a way, just to, a few minutes to try to, in a way, figure out the relationship between the two presentations. And I mean, this is volume number 23, and I think Almanach 1 was volume 12. So in a way, you can now measure the volume project by the almanacs. The almanacs, like the weather, they arrive in a certain frequency, and this one is very different from the first one. So it seems to me there's, within the Almanach project, there's a kind of self-reflection, and the thing has evolved. So I suppose in volume number, whatever it would be, the Almanach 3 would change it again, but still not clear to me exactly the relationship between this document, let's say, and let's say the work of the studio. On the one hand, volume belongs to the OMA kind of confusion, and on the other hand, it's a separate project. In you know, almost volume was constructed to make it possible for there to be separate projects. So somehow it drifts away from you guys, and then it's also somehow reappears, like Todd, it reappears in the desert towards the end of your presentation. So I'm trying to figure out the geometry of this. Another way to ask the same question would be, in a certain way, what you're saying, Todd, is that you guys didn't write this, that you edited this, and your intelligence involved locating the people who could tell the story. So this is actually much more a story written from the Middle East than about the Middle East. It's sort of like a story as told by those already changed by the Middle East, which makes sense of the fact that it's even sponsored by UPC and so on. So I guess I'm just trying to figure all this out. And the reason I think it's worth asking these kind of boring questions is that the whole word research has been super devalued in our field because it's used every 2 minutes. And so on the one hand, this constant refrain of research, there's probably not an architect on the planet that doesn't say that what they're doing is research. And on the one hand, it's sort of honorable, like it's the chanting the claim as old as Vitruvius that the architect is an intellectual. On the other hand, if you chant that often, what seems to be a confident claim is actually a little bit more nervous claim. And actually, almost the word research, it starts to, in a way, pass through the areas of the greatest doubt in our field. So in a way, exactly when architects confidently assert to themselves, to their clients, to their readers and so on, that they're doing research, and that somehow then lends their objects a certain special magic. their research has almost walked over, happily but blindly, some of the biggest challenges facing the species of architects. So if I could make this a simple question. It seems to me, that, Rem, that as you go further and further into the desert, literally, the work is less and less predictable. I mean, less and less, let's say, predictable if what you're expecting is the work of an architect. So it's preservation, then it becomes preservation of an architect. I mean, it's all these other things. So somehow I think there has to be actually a feedback loop stronger than you suggest between this document that you let other people write and the work that you yourself most actively doing, the work that you would keep as close to you as possible, which is further and further away from what architects thought that they were supposed to be doing.
Well, I would like to say that, of course, my entire life I've pursued two things with almost kind of equal passion. One is producing books, and the second one is to produce architecture. And I really would prefer to think of this as a book rather than research, because it's kind of really. I think that the percentage of architects participating in this whole book is actually negligible. It's kind of really a book by writers, mostly, and journalists, and therefore I really prefer the terminology book, and I don't want to be either kind of mystical or superficial about kind of suggesting the connection. The connection is to simply be involved in the two experiences. On the one hand, almost every single waking moment is spent in the world as a writer, and for instance, trying to look for signs of irregularity in Dubai's seemingly impenetrable surface is really an activity of a writer. And if I look in the Swiss countryside and see that kind of villages there have the same kind of curious deadness, and that there too signs of irregularity are getting kind of less and less. You know, as a writer, I'm able to create certain speculations as to why that might happen and what is actually happening. So all that part of thinking, I would say, is kind of really more the thinking of a journalist slash essay writer, rather than and maybe in certain cases somebody thinking in fictional terms of fiction, rather than the crude preparations for eventual architectural kind of efforts. And what I try to show this evening is that nevertheless the same experience can kind of lead or fuel or give energy to particular architectural efforts.
And where are you on that, Todd?
I agree.
Your job is safe.
Hey, thought didn't work for us.
But what do you think?
I do agree. I think also one word that we often use at Volume is broadcasting. Actually, I think that came from Columbia. The notion of that it's not always about research, but it's about finding a way of extending an idea, of putting something on the table to discuss. And you know, the only time the word research came up in this project was research for the book, and it wasn't a project about, let's say, influencing design, but it's definitely a product that we were hoping would become let's say, a document to be discussed within a field of urbanism or architecture.
But what is extremely good for us is that this book is read voraciously there, and discussed voraciously there.
More there than
more there than here, and maybe we think that even is kind of very appropriate.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that what the book really shows is that in spite of all the external appearances that sometimes kind of suggest stagnation, authoritarianism, regressiveness, and dogmatism, that there is at the same time a very vigorous, sometimes shapeless wave of modernity and modernization going on, that is to which particularly the younger generations are extremely committed, and that they obviously are wanting to bring to a particular end. And in that sense, I think that maybe one of the beautiful effects of the crisis will be that this huge army of consultants and this huge Atlantic, let's use that word, script writing for the region will now recede, and since there are fewer kind of opportunistic reasons to be involved, and that it can find its own level.
I mean, I'm wanting to cling a little bit to your separation of the book from research, because that, I mean, if what you just did by separating them makes sense, 95% of what's said about what architects write is at risk. For example, the dimension of this is more or less the same as Siegfried Gideon's Space-Time in Architecture. It's actually almost within 10 pages of the first edition. So
this was designed so it could fit in a mailbox.
Yeah. Pay attention. But if, for example, I mean, or let's say it another way. I mean, there are lots. People have spent the last 20 years inventing uninteresting ways to describe your work, and they've really explored most options. But this seems to me the standard way to be uninteresting about your work is to try to draw a one-to-one connection between the books and the buildings, as if one tries to explain or rationalize or take responsibility for the other. And it's when I hear you say, when you emphasize yourself as a writer, what I pick up on that is actually what's sort of going on there is much more to do about the irresponsibility or the ability of the book to escape from the building and vice versa, or even the combination of the two, when they pretend to aim at each other, really they aim to miss. So they pass each other, and that generates a sort of momentary heat around which you operate. But those are, again, but getting back to all of those architects saying, I'm doing research, look at my window detail, I can't tell you how much research led to this magnificence. What they don't want to say is, I'm a writer, and I've constructed I mean, they're really trying to, as a way, take that out. Yes?
Yeah, but Mark, what do you want me to say? I mean, no. What can I say? It's a bit cruel. We all agree that the term research is abused by the architecture profession, and we both probably have a certain responsibility in doing that.
Yes.
And it's a bit cheap for either of us now to deflate a bubble that we were probably partly responsible for inflating.
Yes.
So let's let's nature take its course and not artificially accelerate the process.
Okay. But you know what you're very
by producing books.
Okay, but one of the pleasures of listening to you and reading you is that you quite often confess to something and then do it 10 times more. Like the confession even creates the space. I mean, because in a way, when you create Ammo Oma in 1998, you created an image of symmetry, between the buildings and the books, between the research and the objects and so on. A symmetry which echoes that which was there at the beginning, in as much as like Oma starts in whatever it is, 75, and Delirious New York is like 3 years later, but the research for that is 3 years before. So there's always this, let's say, image of symmetry between the two, even if you're going to prick that bubble yourself.
No, not really, because Ammo is not the books. Ammo is a kind of totally different field. What we're doing with Ammo is kind of we're applying architectural thinking to in fields that need it, but that don't need buildings. So that is the definition of Ammo. So I don't see Ammo as a kind of separation between books / research and buildings. I see it more as finding ways in applying the intelligence of architecture in fields outside architecture. So maybe that is a very simple clarification, but that for me is the, let's say, the symmetry or the twinning of Ammo and Oma. And books have, in a way, nothing to do with that couple. They have nothing to do with Oma and nothing to do with Ammo.
So, being belligerent, this book then is not an Ammo book. Which makes sense of, it makes sense of what you're saying about it, letting it be written from the region, right? It's as distinct from an Ammo book. Like in your quote, Todd, the quote says they gave up the Ammo graphics. It's like a kind of.
I think that what I would like to resurrect is the moment that volume was born. Basically, a very promising and kind of respectable architectural magazine, which actually had as one of its qualities to be able to make excursions away from architecture, and for which it was severely punished by its readers, who were mostly architects, and by the people who gave subsidies, who really thought that it was a magazine that needed to limit itself to architecture. And so basically there was a crisis, and you, without, as far as I know, any money to yourself, you were representing an institution. I, without any money, was representing an architectural office. And so basically we made a construction that not us ourselves, but respectively my office and your institution could support that effort. And therefore I think it still has that degree of autonomy and independence of us. We support it, but we are more kind of, what is it, paid father? Paid father? Godfather, yeah. Godfathers than owners, I would say.
Okay, so I feel like I extracted my blood because that's what I meant at the very beginning by trying to say this is not exactly what might be expected of it. It is neither a straight Ammo research report in the line of the others. It's in fact different from the previous almanac, nor is it an explanation exactly of what you're up to in the Middle East, although
no, we don't appear in it.
Right. So it exists in that experimental space that Volume tried to create. But having said all of that, when you see Todd in the Desert and you see the latest work, there is a feedback loop.
Yeah, of course.
There's a feedback loop.
It is a connection. Yes.
So we go to the audience. This is 5 minutes of democracy, which is actually more than the norm. Yeah.
Todd, you mentioned the amount of cities that's currently going up in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Saudi Arabia, which a lot of it tends to be hermetic in nature, monolithic, and with a huge emphasis on clean energy. So of course you have Dubai, which is sort of a version of this being realized, and then Abu Dhabi. And I know at least one more that's sort of being visioned in Riyadh, but you mentioned there was 6. So I'm a little curious whether you see a correlation between these cities and sort of the gradual decline or depletion of oil, which is a lot of sort of like the major export in all of these cities, and what that ultimately means for these countries, and what happens, what would the export be essentially when the oil runs out? Is it sort of the ideas, is it the technology, or is it sort of the, you know, the ideas of the cities themselves?
Saudi Arabia, first of all, is an entirely different story than, say, Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi had the ambition to explore some ideas of sustainability. I think those are all at risk at this point in time. I'll just focus on Saudi. There are these 6 economic cities, and the notion of these cities, the reason why they're on the table is these cities are proposed as solutions to problems, namely problems being one that oil will eventually run out, and that the money being earned through oil sales now needs to be invested into things that will produce new kinds of industries. The other reason why these cities are being built is that Saudi Arabia, unlike the rest of the Gulf, is experiencing a population boom. There's a growing youth that's going to need jobs, and these jobs aren't just going to come from Aramco and the oil fields. And so there's a need to diversify in this way. And we do get and then that opens up a whole other idea of kind of what a middle class means in Saudi. I'll just keep my answer short there.
Very fast, yeah. Just far away, yeah. Okay, so one more. Somewhere like, this is a democracy, so it has to be one from the middle, one from the left, and one from the right. Nothing from over here? Okay, so way in the back. Yell.
Hi. What would be the topic of your final lecture? It's a simple one.
Excuse me?
Simple question. What would be the topic of your final lecture?
Of my final lecture?
The final one.
I have no idea. Do you have a suggestion?
For the person who asked the question, we provide psychotherapy at reduced rates. Your desire that there be a last lecture.
I mean, would it be about life work or?
I really don't know, but I'm too alive to talk about life work.
Anyway, just to thank everybody for coming and to thank Rem for not giving the final lecture tonight, and I want to join with Rem in congratulating Todd on really a fantastic book, a book that's just as troubling to a school of architecture as it is to the figure of a professional architect. And I mean, just to say, in almost by way of warning, the degree of intelligence of our field, like most fields, may well be judged over the next 20 years by the degree to which we become less stupid about Saudi Arabia. And I really mean that. And it's in a way something to be proud of, that from within the field of architecture there was very, very serious work done towards that end, and I think you guys did a magnificent job. Thanks.